Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute at 1 o'clock, but thanks for joining early to make sure everything's working. And while you're waiting, we have an opener question. So if you could go to menti.com and enter the code on the screen or use the link that Evan's going to be dropping in the chat to go there directly, you can join on either your phone or in a browser and answer the question of if you're pitching the EMIS, the Energy Management Information System, you want to your management team tomorrow, what reasons do you think they'd give for rejecting it or pushing back on that request, on that proposal? What might you expect to hear? All right. So welcome everyone to today's workshop. We'll start diving into it now. Today's the second workshop in our series on getting started with Energy Management Information Systems, or EMIS. And before we get into the main content today, I do have an opening question for the group. So please use the link in the chat that Evan has dropped in there. Or you can go to menti.com, enter the code on the screen, either through your phone or through an internet browser on your computer, and answer the following question. If you were pitching the EMIS you want to your management team, what reasons would they give to reject it or push back on their proposal? All right. So if you can take a minute to answer that question, you can keep Menti open in your phone or browser because we are going to be coming back to it a couple times through today's workshop. And as I mentioned, today's the second in the series on getting started with EMIS. And today we're going to be talking about finding the right entry point. Because when you're starting to plan for an EMIS, for your facility, for your organization, it can be hard to know where to start. And many plans fizzle out because people try to do too much at once. So going to some of the answers here, again, if you could go to menti.com to answer that question. I'll just get that started here. There we go. Menti.com, you can enter the code at the top of the screen, or the participation link is in the chat. I'll just drop that in there again for reference. So what would you likely hear as the reasons for pushback or for not buying into the EMIS plans? Too complex. Yeah, that's a common one. It's they can be challenging things for people not working in energy to really wrap their mind around. They're very complex projects, very integrated through the facilities. So it can be a lot to ask in terms of that. They connect, touch in a lot of different areas as well. Don't know where to start. Yeah, that's a common one we hear as well. Who's going to babysit this thing? Yeah, it's not just the installation, and EMIS doesn't deliver savings. It only delivers savings if you use the information to drive action, which makes it a little bit different. And to do that, you need someone. I don't know if I'd use the word babysitting, but you need someone monitoring and overseeing it and taking ownership of it. Yeah, the budget, costs. Yeah, so those are common pushbacks as well. Cost restrictions, those are a big ones. It's a big ask, and similar to the comment about babysitting it is it can be a large cost to ask when there aren't guaranteed savings. Like if you go to upgrade a air compressor or a chiller, there's a pretty high level of certainty that that piece of equipment is going to be more efficient than what was in place. But with an EMIS, there's no guarantee that you're actually going to get savings because you have to actually use the information, and there's a lot of uncertainty around that. The installation support. Some people are just not great at sales, and that may impact it as well. All right, yeah, not convinced it'll pay back. Worried about the vendor lock-in. Great. All right, so these are all really common things that we see. Great to see it coming up here. What we're going to be talking about today, the goal of this workshop is to help you assess your current state and that desired end state when it comes to EMIS adoption, and identify those gaps between where you are, where you want to be. And as we go through this, what we're really going to be doing is helping you work on developing a practical pathway with a feasible entry point. So instead of asking for that big, complicated, expensive EMIS and developing a proposal around that, we're going to work through this process to help you identify what might be a good starting point for that is feasible, that's not going to receive the same level of pushback. So we do have a participant workbook that goes along with this. It summarizes a lot of things that we're talking about, and it also has room for you to take notes and do some of the activities in mapping out that entry point and the pathway to your desired end state. So the link to this, Evan just dropped it in the chat. If you could open that link, it will open a read-only copy. So please download the copy of it to your computer so that you can follow along and use that. If you're having any issues with that, type in chat and Evan can help you out. So why finding the right entry point matters? Why is that important when you're planning or scoping out your EMIS? Every organization wants the insights and control that an EMIS can provide. Some may not quite know it yet, but there is a lot of value there. But how do you start that journey? How you start it can make or break your success. So some teams are ready for a full implementation right away. Others face resistance. All those reasons that we saw in that first Menti question there. And sometimes that can call for a more phased approach. So let's look at an example just to illustrate this difference. In this case, we have a manufacturing facility and the energy team developed a comprehensive EMIS proposal, covering all the systems, a number of sites, full data integration, the whole thing. And technically sound, lots of expected benefits coming out of it, but it's a large investment, a lot of uncertainty around those potential savings, and they started getting some pushback. So they needed to get really broad cross-departmental coordination. There are a lot of questions about how this would work, how this would integrate, would it cause challenges. They faced questions from management about the feasibility, the costs around it, that uncertainty on the return on investment, how long it would take, the complexity. All of that led to this not being approved, to being kind of deferred, but deferred indefinitely, essentially. On the other hand, we have a small scale metering initiative. This is focusing just on collecting, analyzing, reporting, tracking data from a couple of significant energy users. So it was relatively low cost. It was framed as a pilot project of let's try this out and see how it goes. Because of those factors, it was able to get relatively quick approval and started generating measurable insights in terms of the operations, opportunities to improve efficiency. And the success of that pilot demonstrated the benefits, started building confidence in the results that metering could provide. And in addition to that, it established practices and processes for actually managing and using the data to drive action so that people in the organization could see what that looked like and how getting that information in a way that was usable to them could benefit their roles, whether that was maintenance or in finance or in other departments. So when they came back 12 months later with that proposal for a more full-blown EMIS, they had a lot less resistance to move forward. So both of those approaches end for that same end goal, connected, data-driven organization. The difference lies in the timing and the readiness. And when that pushback or uncertainty arises, finding the right entry point can help demonstrate the success and value faster and build support and momentum for where you eventually want to end up. So, that full EMIS rollout is ideal when leadership is ready and confident in the value that it will provide. But when that's not the case, a well-chosen entry point can break through some of those barriers and build that trust internally. And every successful EMIS, whether launched big or small, starts by meeting your organization where it is. So the message here isn't to always start small, it's to start smart. If your organization is ready, go all in. If not, choose an entry point that builds that credibility and starts you down the path to that end state vision that you have. And that's how you ensure that the EMIS journey doesn't stall, but scales. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today, how you do that effectively, how you plan that entry point as the first step on that path, rather than trying to jump straight to the end point. So we explored why finding that entry point matters, and now we're going to look a little bit about how you do that. So the first step is to understand your current EMIS maturity, where you are right now in terms of systems, data, processes. And once you know that, then you'll have a clear starting point for your journey. So some organizations are still at a really basic stage. tracking a single meter or reviewing utility bills, sometimes not even that. Others have dashboards, analytics in place, and a number of other tools in there already. But knowing your current position helps you choose realistic next steps. So we covered this in a previous webinar on EMIS types and use cases. And you can find a recording to that on the Save on Energy training site. And Evan dropped a link to that, selecting the right EMIS for your needs. So there's a recording from that webinar. If you want to check that out afterwards, please do. But for those that didn't attend that, here's a quick refresher of the kind of stages of maturity. So the first is where it's mostly manual. So data is recorded manually, maybe utility bill, some utility meter data coming in, often once a month is how that happens. Then you move out to partial. So you have some automation. Some submetering may exist, but the systems may not be connected particularly well. Integrated is where those systems start to share data across key energy uses, across departments. And then lastly, that automated system is real-time dashboards, automated reports that help drive active decision making. And to assess your current state, we're going to look at 5 aspects of an EMIS. So the first is metering. That's what's measured. Utility bills, main meters, submeters, electricity, gas, water, production, etc. All the data that's coming into it and how that's measured. The next is data collection. So that's how the data is gathered, whether it's manual logs, spreadsheets, data loggers, connected devices. Analysis is how that data is interpreted. If you're using just Excel spreadsheets, if you're using RetScreen or other tools like that, or vendor systems that conduct that analysis as part of the service. Reporting is how those results are shared. So like whether it's monthly reports, Power BI, vendor dashboards, scorecards, that sort of thing. And then communication. So how that insight drives action. And this includes things like energy meetings, internet posts, shift huddles, that type of stuff. So bringing in that people side of it. And what we're going to have you do now is take a minute to think about your current state in each of those areas. So in that participant workbook, hopefully you've downloaded it. If you haven't opened it or downloaded it yet, you can use the link that Evan just dropped in the chat to follow the link, download a copy, and use that. But on page 3 of that workbook, there's space for you to start recording some information about your current state. What is it like in your organization when it comes to your EMIS? So I'd like you to use that leftmost column labeled current state and write down some notes about what's currently in place in your organization for each of those 5 areas. So for example, with submetering, you might write down utility meter or utility meter plus limited electrical submetering, or maybe extensive submetering. I'm just going to pause here for just a couple of minutes to let you fill out that column and start getting some notes down about what your facility looks like. If anyone has questions about what to fill in or what that might be, please raise your hand, come off mute, or type in the chat. So we're going to take just a quick pause here to give everyone a chance to fill out their current state to help define that. Okay. So we're going to be coming back to this page throughout the workshop, so please keep it open and ready. You may notice there are other columns there as well, as a bit of a spoiler. Okay, so hopefully you've written down some of your current state. Now I'd like you to go back to Menti, the link's in the chat, or you can just go back to what you had open before. And I want you to rate the strength of each of those EMIS aspects in your organization. So whether it's meeting, data collection, analysis, reporting, or communication, in your organization, would you rate those as minimal or basic? So if you just had a utility meter that you were checking once a month, okay, maybe that's minimal or basic. If you had very extensive submetering in place, then you might rate that as very strong. So let's see where people are in terms of these 5 different aspects here. And if you have any questions to clarify those 5 ones, again, please let me know. So we're starting to see a bit of a range coming up here. It's interesting, the metering is sort of either minimal or very strong. There seems to be a little valley in the middle there. Um, Analysis, reporting, communications seems to be skewed a little bit more over towards the minimal or basic side on it. Interesting. Okay, great. Data collection is a bit stronger there. Okay, so this is good to get a kind of a sense of which of those areas you're stronger in, which one of the ones might be need more improvement or need more work as you're working to plan or develop your EMIS. Great. All right. So now that we know where your organization stands now, we can start defining what your desired end state looks like. And then after that, we can start planning on how you get there. So in the last section, you identified your current EMIS maturity and where your system stands today. So now we're going to flip the lens and define what good looks like for you. So using the same framework, those 5 aspects, we're going to map out your desired end state so you can easily compare where you are versus where you want to be. So to do that, we need a bit of context because not everyone's end state is going to be the same. Sometimes we think EMIS and it's like, oh, 50,000 data point collection points coming in. It's all centralized and there's massive dashboards. Maybe it's AI enabled. That's not necessarily relevant or appropriate for all facilities, for smaller facilities, for different types. So that strong EMIS vision isn't something that exists in isolation. It's meant to support your organization's goals. So you want to think about what conversations are already happening, where energy data could play a role, like finance reviews, sustainability planning, discussions around reliability, uptime, and aligning your vision with these goals helps ensure that your EMIS is going to add value across departments and not just to the energy team. So that's going to help inform that desired end state. This could be features like real-time dashboards or anomaly detection or outcomes like better GHG tracking or equipment reliability. And a good place to start is to think about organizational outcomes you want to achieve, whether that's cost savings, GHG reductions, improved reliability, and how the EMIS might support that. So on the financial side, energy cost visibility. A lot of organizations use an EMIS to help break down energy costs to different cost centers within the organization. There's also benefits in terms of avoided cost reporting. So all the efficiency measures you're doing, reporting on what the cost savings are of that. Operational impacts in terms of equipment performance, reliability, anomaly detection, supporting preventative maintenance. That type of stuff often aligns up as priorities. When it comes to ESG, so the environmental, social, governance side of things, tracking GHG emissions, sometimes allocating GHG emissions if you're an upstream manufacturer, and sometimes your clients want to know, what is the GHG impact or footprint of the products they're buying from you, and EMIS can help you allocate your emissions towards different products that you produce or to different customers. Could be tracking progress towards your GHG or ESG goals, and or displaying those metrics on there. On the strategic side, this could be helping integrate energy considerations into day-to-day operations, like following efficient operating procedures, making sure equipment's turned off, or using that data to inform capital planning decisions. And looking at compliance, EMIS can help streamline reporting for audits, funding programs, or regulatory reporting requirements that you may have. And this can look different in different sectors. So notice we have some examples here. Notice that while the language changes, the intent stays consistent. You want the EMIS to bring visibility, insight, support continuous improvement, and your organization's version might emphasize reliability or compliance or cost control or engagement, but what matters is that your plan, what you want that end state to look like, is going to reflect your priorities and capacity. So In industrial, they may want to focus more on identifying efficiency opportunities, improve reliability, supporting predictive maintenance, supporting the ISO 50001 compliance. In that case, they may lean more towards energy meters on equipment, alerts when things are out of typical control ranges, things like that as part of that end state. The ISO 50001 compliance, making sure that in the communication side that there's good continuous improvement feedback loops to identify issues when there's non-compliance, and what's being done to address those. The commercial side, it may be really important to integrate with the building automation systems to balance, energy concerns with also comfort of tenants, verify performance measures, efficiency measures like setbacks, occupancy controls to show the impact that those are having to tenants, to the building owners in some cases. And often there's a high priority placed on that automated reporting of building performance, whether that is just within the building or within a region or an overall portfolio, but wanting to see that information readily and in a way that gives insights into that overall management of the portfolio. On colleges and universities, we often see, wanting to track intensity of all the buildings, knowing where to focus their efforts when they maybe have limited resources to put towards it, supporting those maintenance efforts, having an EMIS that provides alert or provides key insights to the maintenance team so they don't have to do manual inspections enough, where the EMIS can help guide them towards where there's issues to resolve, can save a lot of time. And lastly, they may want to align that EMIS with their core services in terms of engaging staff and students, integrating energy management conversations with academia as well. So maybe priorities around the reporting, the communications, how that information is shared beyond what you might have in other organizations because of that broader audience. So here's one example comparing the current state to desired end state across those 5 EMIS aspects. So this is from a medium-sized facility. Desired end state isn't necessarily the Rolls-Royce of EMIS. That may not be appropriate for this facility, but it is intended to be appropriate for the facility of their size and something that's going to meet their needs and serve their priorities. So in this example, they want to move from 1 utility meter to having sub-meters in all major energy systems. They want to move from monthly manual entry of data to automated daily uploads, make it easier, reduce their effort that's involved in reporting and monitoring energy. They want to move from Excel spreadsheets that are currently used to monitor performance trends to having automatic performance analysis taking place, and move from ad hoc reporting to standardized dashboards for all departments, and move from informal updates to having some real structure around communications with monthly reviews, calls to action, understanding what people are using this information for and what is happening as a result. So here's one example of what that can look like. I want to put this down because the next thing that we're going to ask you to do is to go back to page 3 of your workbook where you've already written down your current state for these 5 aspects. And this time I want you to skip those 3 middle columns and fill out your desired end state in the far right column. So again, I'm going to pause here for 2 to 3 minutes just to give you a chance to start thinking about that and to fill that out. And if you have any questions about, what you may want your desired end state to be, please raise your hand, come off mute, or use the chat. So again, I'm going to pause for just a moment here to give you a chance to fill this out in your workbook. And if you have questions, please feel free to speak up. Would anyone care to share, their current and desired end state for one of those aspects? I'd love to hear from someone. There was in that Menti question, there's a lot of range of the different starting points. So I'd love to hear in terms of like what you see as current state and where you want to end up for one of those aspects. Anyone care to share that?
Or I can share. Hi.
Great.
So I think that we're really good on metering and data collection. That's we do have like many visual um, screens, metering and then data collection. But in terms of analysis, like there are few people doing that, including myself, and it can be like depends how busy I am. It can be every week, every month, or based on any step changes. So I think that is one of the aspects that I would like to see, like more people getting involved or more analysis. And then after that reporting, yeah, we do have some main reporting end of the month quarterly, but for any event that happens and we like any issue that we do kind of analyze and root cause, then we stop there. Like we figure it out, we find it, we solve it, and then there is no report or communication site-wide. So I think these are the aspects that I would like to work on it to improve.
Right. So currently the analysis, reporting, and the communication piece, they're a bit ad hoc. There's some gaps. Sometimes it happens, sometimes not as much as you'd like. And do you have a sense of that, what the end state you'd want to be? Like, is that, automated analysis and reporting, or just having more of a structure around it to make sure that it is happening consistently?
Well, what I want, I think it is essential for all the analysis to be reported and communicated widely, especially at the operating level, because I think that's what I want to see. That there's a miscommunication between different parts of the plant. So even running the same machine like in different groups, there are even like miscommunication between groups, and then the same issue comes up, and then we have to start over because there is not a good. There might be like each team have their own backup data and background, but it's not something that everyone can have access to it, especially if it comes to energy consumptions. So I think that it should be an automated reporting if something happens. That's what I would love to see. And even if we can get to that reporting, I would say that the communication would be easier because then the report goes to everyone, and then that's where we want to be.
Right. So that end state you want to see is like, okay, that the analysis and reporting, that's happening automatically. The information's getting out to the people. And then on the communication side, there's more frequent check-ins of, okay, how are people using this, or what have you done? What actions have you taken, and sharing those so people can learn from each other as well.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Does anyone else want to share their current state, desired end state, how those compare for any of these aspects? If anyone does want to jump in, please raise your hand. I do love hearing about the situation that you're facing on the ground there. But now that we have defined where you are, where you want to go, it's time to think about like what's standing in the way. How do we get from where you are to where you want to be, that desired end state? So these gaps show us the difference between the systems, data, processes we have now and where we eventually want to end up. And most of these gaps fall into one of three types, either upgrading infrastructure, connecting systems, or improving processes. So upgrading infrastructure, that's adding new or improved physical digital assets, like adding submeters, replacing sensors, like implementing reporting dashboards. Connecting systems is all about making sure that those systems communicate better. So whether that is, linking your building automation system or factory automation system to the EMIS, unifying naming conventions to facilitate that, different things like that to make sure that the data is connected throughout the whole EMIS system from all the different sources. And lastly, improving processes. This is more about the people or the workflows that need refinement. So in the example we just talked about, I think some of that was process of getting people regularly looking at the data, looking for how to address those issues, sharing that information with each other. That's on the processes side of things. So this can include streamlining reporting, clarifying people's roles, improving how people use data, and how frequently, consistently they do that. So going back to that generic example that we have of the media manufacturing company, this isn't necessarily comprehensive of everything they'll need to do to get from their current state to their desired end state, but just meant as an example to get you thinking about what that would be. And if you've noticed a pattern, you may guess that I'm going to ask you to do this for your facility after this example. So it's good to start thinking about what this might look like in your on your sheet. So, on metering in this facility, to move from one utility meter to sub-meters in all major systems, they're going to need, in terms of infrastructure, adding sub-meters to those significant energy users, making sure that they're collecting that data. They're going to need some data gateways to help integrate that data, to bring that data into a centralized place for analysis. And on the process side, they're going to have to start standardizing naming conventions to avoid confusion of what meters are reporting what. On data collection, they want to move from monthly manual entry to automated daily updates. So they, they need those data loggers. They need the connections across and data feeds to connect them to the central system. And they need to define data review schedules, data quality control practices to make sure that that's all maintained, that the data collection is all maintained and reliable and trustworthy. Analysis, moving from spreadsheets to monitor trends to build in performance analytics. They're going to need to select, install an analytics software package, connect that production data with energy data to calculate KPIs, and they're going to need to train staff to regularly review, interpret this data so they know what they're seeing and they know what they're looking for when they see that data. On reporting, they wanted to move from ad hoc Excel reports to dashboards across all departments. So again, they need to, infrastructure upgrade, they need to add those dashboard tools. They need to have connect systems, a way to auto-generate those reports and get those out through typical communication channels to the different departments so that they can view or access them. And in terms of processes, they want to improve the format, clarity of those data visualizations, and ensure that that reviewing that data is part of each department or each team's process on a regular basis, whether that's in morning scrums, weekly performance meetings, whatever, that's part of their regular processes. And lastly, for communication, they want to install or implement ways to display the results that they're seeing on site. They want to make sure that the information and insights are being shared across teams. So not just the energy data going out to the teams, but what the teams are doing with that data. They want that being shared more and making sure that that information is being connected. And ensuring there's regular review meetings to check on progress, results, issues to make sure that the departments are all using the system and getting value from it and identifying issues, opportunities to improve. Is there anything I can clarify about the types of gaps or this gap process that I've been showing here before we move on to the next step? Okay, I don't see any hands. Oh, in regards to entry points, good starting point with the most problematic areas or perhaps critical area, detailed, definitive, not immediate. All right. I do appreciate that comment. I think that's very timely because we're getting there soon. So right now we're mapping it out. And then we're going to be looking at choosing that specific project. And that's some good tips, some good spoilers for where we're going to be ending up. But right now, I want you to go back to page 3 and take a minute to fill in some of those gaps. We'll pause for a moment here, but I'm not going to have time to fill in all of those. But thinking about what you see as the ones that really jump out to you at the moment. Thinking about your current state, your desired end state. What are those infrastructure upgrades, the improved connection between systems, those process improvements that you're going to need to get to that end state that you want? And on a similar to the comment in the chat there, maybe start with those ones that are most obvious that you think are going to be those gaps that are really important, or that are those big gaps. I see a hand up there.
Yeah, this is Venki here. So yeah, I have a question regarding the data collection one. Like most of the I work for a municipality, so what we face is like with the natural gas data.
Oi.
Those things are kind of like all estimated ones. So how do you have a solution for getting the exact data, even if we do a submetering kind of stuff on that? Do you have any recommendation or anything on that?
Right. So in that situation, your current state would be, you have a utility meter there, but a lot of it is estimated readings. It's not consistently read, or it doesn't have that connectivity. Your desired end state would be to have, good connection, readily available data, at least on a reasonable interval, if not, real time on that. In terms of like those gaps, there's definitely that infrastructure upgrade as part of that. And in some cases, in certain facilities, depending on facility size, sometimes you can have conversations with the gas utility about, is it possible to upgrade that meter so that it has more connectivity on there. For some meters, it's possible to connect, pulse systems or connect communication from that meter into your systems on that. So that might be a connect solution. There may be infrastructure upgrades in terms of installing your own natural gas meters, although those do tend to be costly on there. So I would say the first step maybe is talking to the utility about what options might be available on that side. Again, I'm not sure by region or things like that, but gas utilities they often have plans of rolling out more advanced meters that don't require manual readings, so you don't have to do those estimates. So sometimes it's talking about like, hey, can we accelerate that on there? And then the last one is improving process of how that data is coming in there.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. I see a comment there with regards to the gas submetering. Try utilizing a gas instrumentation submeter or strap-on meter or inline if possible. Yeah, and I have heard, I'm not as up to date. I have heard of some like installing natural gas meters tends to be expensive, but I have heard of some non-intrusive ones that can be strapped on, but I'm not fully up to date on like what the costs of those are like. But that could be one example of, that moving that from your current state to desired end state of metering, what some of those gaps might be within that. So hopefully others, you are looking at this and have been filling out some of the gaps that you have. Again, starting with those that you think might be some of the biggest gaps on there. I appreciate Venki sharing that question about the gas meters. Would anyone else like to share some of the gaps they've identified, or what do you see as some of the big gaps between moving from where you currently are to ultimately where you want to end up? Anyone had identified, like the metering one is a pretty common one on natural gas, but even on electrical, a lot of people, they only have the utility meter in place. But in terms of some of those other ones, I'd be curious if anyone's identified, on the analysis, reporting, communication, data collection, like specific gaps that they would want to address. If there's anyone, please feel free in the chat. I think this part is, Alan? You're still muted at the moment, but I see your hand.
Yeah, I just had to get unmuted. So for me, my biggest gap is on the reporting side, where my current structure is a manual reporting system, primarily through spreadsheets. What I am investigating and looking at is a high-level reporting system, something along the lines of Edgecom Energy or Resource Advisor from Schneider Electric, or I don't know, there's a number of commercially available products for reporting energy. But my biggest gap is the conversion from a manual to an automated system.
Like getting that automated reporting in there. So like you already have some of the metering stuff in place, but so on that one for the reporting, the infrastructure gap is like, okay, you need that analytics platform something along those lines for it. And you need
Correct.
that connection of all the data that is available that you're currently bringing to an Excel spreadsheet. You need that being connected into that system as well.
Correct. Exactly.
Right. Okay. And then, improving processes, there might be some gaps around like training people, making sure that, processes. One of the things that I've seen from when people move from manual reporting to automatic reporting is that when they were doing the manual reporting and analysis of it, they're doing their own quality control and like checking the reliability of the data and things like that. But sometimes when it moves to automatic, now they just assume that it's all right. So one of those gaps in moving to an automated thing in terms of the process side is making sure there is those quality control checks and quality assurance stuff within that as well. That might be new processes that weren't there because it was kind of built into the manual side of things. So that's really important as well. So hopefully everyone's got at least some of these gaps identified. The next thing we want to do is start prioritizing those. Which ones are the most important? So we like using these impact effort 2x2 matrices where you can take the gaps that you've identified. You can go to page 8 in your participant workbook and start putting them into this matrix. So rate them in terms of the impact they're likely to have in your organization if addressed, the benefits you'll get from them, and then in terms of the effort to implement. And that can be either cost, time, or barriers it might face. Like how difficult would it be to push that through? And think about where they'd fall in here in terms of low impact, low effort, high impact, high effort as well. So the gaps that would require low effort to address but have really high impact, those make really good starting points for EMIS, which goes back to the comment in the chat there in terms of wanting to get the most impact, things that are going to have a definitive ROI. High effort gaps, those you may want to leave until later EMIS implementation phases. And visualizing it this way can be helpful because we often see people focusing on equipment upgrades, like adding submeters, adding those communication systems, which can be very beneficial, but they aren't always low effort. And particularly when there might be some really high impact improvements that are lower effort, like just putting in place processes to make better use of the data you already have. I've seen organizations say, hey, we need to install submeters. We need more metering to get more data. And then I asked them, it's like, well, what are you doing with your utility meter data right now? And they're like, well, we look at the bill every month, but we're not doing a lot. It's like, okay, there's a lot more you can be doing with that, with very little barriers to start doing that and start getting value from it and start demonstrating that value, which is ultimately is going to help support the business case for more metering and for more sub-metering. So let's take a moment here, and those gaps that you identified, I think from the people that shared, we have a pretty good idea of where those might fall on here, but start placing them on there, because the next thing that we're going to do is, having prioritized those gaps, we want to start identifying that feasible entry point, which starts being a project with a defined scope. So it's no longer just the gaps, but we're talking about a project with a defined scope. Like Alan mentioned, it's like, okay, we want an analytics platform, reporting platform. We want to install that. So, and that entry point can be a project defined scope that's going to represent the first stage of your EMIS development. Now, we can start imagining what that entry point project could look like for your site. It could be installation of submetering, adding data logging, data connections, that analytics platform to connect existing meters, or improving reporting communications around the site, improving processes around that. When you're thinking of what that project looks like, there's a couple of characteristics that you want to focus on. First of all, is it feasible? Not too expensive, realistic with existing resources. The feasibility of it, for the purpose of this, when we're looking for that entry point to get started, the feasibility is probably the most important feature. You also want to make sure that it's something that's visible, so that those results are that you expect to get from it are going to be tangible and really easy to communicate. Because remember, one of the objectives of this entry point is to build that support, build that momentum for additional investments in EMIS. So you want it something that people are going to see the value of. So maybe make sure that the scale of this or the scope of this project is going to be providing benefits to people outside of just the energy team. That, you know, maintenance or finance or other departments, they're going to start seeing the value here. You usually want something to be quick to implement. So ideally, something you can do within 3 to 6 months to start getting those quick results and show that there's benefits coming out of this. And you want it to be scalable. So you want it to be a project that builds towards your long-term EMIS vision. So not a separate side project that's going to have to be undone when you start moving forward, but something that gets you closer to where you want to be, to that end goal, even if it's not all the way there. And you want to make sure it's aligned, that it supports those organizational goals. This goes back to that visibility, demonstrating the value of this smaller investment so that you get that buy-in, support, momentum for the larger investment down the road. So we've got another Menti question here around, I'm not sure why these questions are showing up like that, but what your possible entry point might be. So we can go to Menti, or if you're having trouble opening the Menti, just put it in the chat. But what might your possible entry point be? What type of project? So we talked about those gaps, and hopefully you have a good sense of what your priority gaps are. But what would that project be? And I think, you know, Alan mentioned, you know, finding, installing that analytics reporting platform as part of that. Does anyone else have a sense around what that could be? It's going to vary from organization to another in terms of scale, cost, whether it includes capital investments or focuses on process improvements or a mix of the two. There's often, you know, if you have a lot of skepticism around capital, then focusing on process improvements at that entry point could be a good show. All right, census might just not be showing the results here, but you know, hopefully you have a good sense of what that scope of the project is. If anyone has some questions around how you change, you know, identifying the gap into what an entry point project looks like, please do raise your hand or type in chat, and we'll make sure to get to those. Now, here's a quick checklist just to think about. Once you've identified the potential starting point, you know, do a double check. Is it a good choice? So using this checklist, you can identify any weaknesses with your chosen entry point. So you should be able to answer yes to all of these questions and on there. So can it be implemented with a limited budget? Does it support existing priorities? Does it build towards the desired end state? Will it quickly deliver noticeable results? Is it likely to get buy-in? I just want to go back here. We've got enhanced data visibility, getting some return on investment and grants. All right. So think about your entry point and answering these questions for it. Does anyone want to answer no to one of these questions for the entry point project, EMIS project that they had in mind? Or weren't sure whether it would be a yes or a no? Again, I do appreciate seeing anything, so feel free to raise your hand, put in chat. One of the things that is really useful at this stage too is leveraging incentives to strengthen your case. So you have that project in mind. Don't forget that incentives are a really great way to help accelerate that. They lower costs, add credibility to those biggest barriers for EMIS adoption. And a lot of the documentation reporting that goes along with incentives can do a lot of good internally too, in terms of building that trust, that support, that these are really delivering results. So make sure to take advantage of them. Reach out to Save on Energy for more information. And I want to raise this here as a key point. I will have some more information on this program later on. At this point, we we're going to present a case study. We did have a guest lined up, but unfortunately they had a last minute cancellation and were not able to join to share their information. But I do want to talk about their process a little bit. So they were coming from an automotive manufacturing facility and originally wanted a large scale EMIS system, lots of data collection points, fully integrated with their factory automation system and that sort of stuff. But it was a challenge. It was an expensive system. So what they did was they ended up proposing a scaled down EMIS that focused on the highest energy users, mostly the compressors, all incoming power sources. And the reasoning behind this was to recognize larger scale patterns in their usage, identify opportunities for load shifting, and establishing a baseline for the facility to measure both where they were and changes over time and the impact of efficiency projects moving forward. So it started out as a pretty large EMIS system, but it got scaled down to like, let's focus on our significant energy users. And I think the cost of this ended up being under $25,000 installed on there. One of the biggest barriers they faced as part of this was the need to shut down operations to install sensors on the incoming power. And as part of their processes, the coordinating that suitable time for the customers and the machines posed a pretty significant challenge. So that was something they really had to consider in the proposal of like, this presents a risk, it can impact our operations, how are we going to mitigate that? So that was one of the big things, and also one of the reasons of scaling down, because that smaller system would be much less intrusive on facility operations as a whole, not as complex. And financially, they reduced the cost significantly from 6 figures down to under 25,000. In terms of some of the lessons learned that they did share was that during the implementation, they learned the importance of involving all of the relevant parties early in the process. And in their case, they didn't engage IT until after the hardware was installed, which resulted in delays of the project getting IT on board with it. And additionally, they found it was really important to train multiple people on using the system, accessing the system, to help improve the resiliency of it, so that more than one person can work with the data. It's not reliant on one person in case they leave. And lastly, incentives play a significant role in this project, both at the early stage project and then at the larger rollout expansion to the next phases, because those hardware costs can be substantial. But the initial smaller scope allowed them to focus their efforts on those machines, the product lines that are going to have the most impact, rather than the entire plant, which they do eventually still want to get to, but that's sort of a down the line plan there. And in terms of practical tips they wanted to share, other than trying to find that right sized EMIS entry point, they said first set your initial goals up front. For us, it was proving the data would be used, that the data would be used before making a significant investment. To them, that was crucial. So going back to that idea that there's no guaranteed return on EMIS, it's only if you use the data. So starting with a small one and showing that, yes, we are going to use the data, we are going to get benefits from this, so we can justify that larger investment. And then they said the second, try to plan for the future demand rather than current needs. So if that EMIS becomes limited, it's going to need to be replaced later. So it's good to have something that has room to expand with your plans, and selecting hardware that can be repurposed or is flexible as the plant evolves over time. They found that to be really useful as well. And I see a comment in there that another key metric, in addition to the ease of use and proven ROI, should be accuracy, especially in regards to critical areas and loads where energy sensor data is critical. Yeah, and I think that webinar that Evan linked to before on selecting the right EMIS for you, that talks about some of those considerations in the EMIS systems, and accuracy is a big one, and understanding that level of accuracy that's important for your operations, your facility, and those different uses that, as I mentioned, might be critical in there. So seeing like the importance and how we find that entry point, the next thing we want to look at is that entry point in context of that broader pathway to the end goal. And making sure that it's scalable, future ready. So using that same maturity spectrum as before, you can plot where you want to be within the next 1 to 3 years. Maybe your goal is to move from manual to partial integration, from partial to fully automated. But the idea is to create a tangible picture of success and how that moves forward through there. So we have some, I'm going to go through some tips or advice that we've collected, we've seen over time in each of those 5 areas that can be useful to keep in mind when planning that entry point, to make sure that that is a stepping stone and a building block towards a more fulsome, larger EMIS project. So one of the things with metering is you do want to try to avoid vendor lock-in by making sure that anything that you buy now speaks open, widely supported protocols. So whether that's like Modbus, RTU, BACnet, MQTT, REST APIs, those sort of things. You want to make sure that the meters that you install support one or more of these natively, so that you have flexibility later on to integrate them with potentially different EMIS vendors and with different ways to communicate. It's also good to look for meters with expandable or upgradable features. So, potentially looking for multi-parameter meters that can handle kilowatt, kVAR, power factor, harmonics, even if you only need the basic kilowatt hours now. If you think you might need or might want those broader parameters in the future, it's good to get those at the moment. Some meters have upgradable communication cards that would allow swapping of Modbus for BACnet or Ethernet cards later to give them that flexibility, either moving around the facility or with different EMIS or different connection systems. Onboard logging can be really beneficial. Even when you integrate into a broader system, that local data buffering can be helpful in case of network outages. And one thing that's really important at this stage is making sure that you have standardized device naming and protocols in place, and making sure that you have a consistent tagging scheme that's using consistent human readable naming that can make the integration analytics much faster later on, regardless of the EMIS vendor. When it comes to data collection, depending on your entry point, some of this might not be needed right away if you're still doing manual data collection. But once you start considering the data collection infrastructure, there's some things to think about. It can be really helpful to start designing and planning out the communications backbone. So Ethernet is often a very good option if you are able to run those cables. It's easy to scale, supports power over Ethernet devices, and integrates pretty easily with most modern EMIS platforms. For legacy or distributed assets, there's like Modbus RTU, there's gateways that can convert Ethernet to MQTT later. So having that sort of chain to support those communications, considering network switches that can handle virtual LANs or quality of service source, so that you can segment your energy data network from your main IT network, so they're not over the same communications. And then the other tip that we've seen is installing, whether it's the conduits, the junction boxes, spare cable runs, for what you see as those future meter and sensor needs, because the actual pieces of infrastructure are relatively cheap compared to reworking or running those through the facility. So the incremental cost of running the capabilities for a number of meters is not that much compared to just running one meter and then having to run more later on when you want more collection points. Can be very costly. So that will help with the scaling up. even before the full EMIS system, having some data acquisition system or data gateway, like an Internet of Things edge device, can be really useful to help with the scaling and making sure that you can pull Modbus, BACnet devices, store data locally, forward to cloud or the future EMIS is really useful as part of this system. And that kind of data concentrator can act as a bridge between your meters today and that full EMIS later on. And one thing, and this came up in the case study that we wanted to share, that it's really important to coordinate with your IT team early on. Getting their advice, making sure you're following the security protocols within the organization, whether that's setting up segmented networks like a VLAN, dedicated VLAN for energy data, planning around firewall rules, VPN access. How are you going to grant secure remote access for vendors that you may be using either now or in the future? And then as you grow the system, making sure your EMIS vendors' cybersecurity requirements can be supported with that IT infrastructure. The other thing on the data collection side, as you're starting out, that is a really important tip, is to make sure you keep really detailed records of anything that's going in, whether that's device models, serial numbers, firmware versions, network maps, IP assignments, calibration certificates, data naming conventions. If this is all nicely documented now, then when you go to grow that system, to expand it, to integrate it into a more complete EMIS, that can save thousands and thousands of dollars on integration costs later on. So making sure that whatever you are installing now is well documented so that you have that information ready and you don't have to go out and search and collect it all when you want to expand or integrate the system. On the analysis side, before having a full EMIS, you can store organized data locally, SQL database, time series database, or just a historian. It's good to archive that raw data in those intervals, whatever you have it set up as well as aggregating the data for hourly, daily, in terms of trending and KPIs. Really good structuring that database with consistent naming conventions. It's useful to choose consistent sample intervals, whether it's 1 second, 15 seconds, 1 minute, depending on what's needed for your processes, for your facility, and synchronizing all those devices via network time protocol to make sure that all those timestamps are aligning across systems. So that's something to think of early on. The other thing is it can be really useful to store timestamps in UTC, the Coordinated Universal Time. Avoids issues with daylight savings, time zone confusion later on, particularly if you have facilities that are in different time zones. But when you're doing the analysis, make sure to correct for this, that this is accounted for in the analysis part. We've seen people looking at interval analysis and wondering why consumption is so high during the lunch break, but then drops for an hour later in the evening. So we want to make sure that's corrected as part of that. And then reporting, regardless of the sophistication of your data collection analysis, you want to make sure you're setting up standard, repeatable reports for different audiences. So they should be tailored to each audience's needs, priorities, but standardized to make sure it's easily repeatable. And that so that it happens on a frequent basis, because a big part of this reporting, particularly when you're starting off and have that entry point system, is you want to build habits around people seeing that data regularly, seeing it on a consistent basis, consistent format, so that they can start becoming familiar with it and using that to drive action and inform their decisions. So it's also a good idea to make sure that you're developing a reporting plan that details the audience, frequency, format, who's responsible, to help maintain that resilience of your reporting, even if there's turnover among staff or people move into different roles. And lastly, it's good to avoid proprietary systems at this stage, or at least you want to make sure that your reporting is going to grow with your EMIS, so that whatever systems you have now, make sure that it's either open or that the reports and data are easily extractable if you grow into other systems over time. And then lastly, in terms of communication, you want to plan how those insights are going to drive action. So how are you getting that information in front of people in a way that they understand and know what action to take? So you want to make sure that it's clear when action needs to be taken, whether that's through, very obvious clear data visuals or alerts, notifications that get sent to specific people. And it can be really useful, especially at that entry point, to get input from different stakeholders about what they want to get out of the system. What does finance want to see? What does maintenance want out of this? How is it going to help them? Because this can help ensure that the EMIS is used effectively to generate benefits, but it also helps build that cross-organization support for those greater EMIS investments that you want to achieve. So all of that, the goal is to future-proof those early investments so they don't become obsolete. And even if you're only adding a few submeters, you want to make sure that those can integrate later on and protect those early EMIS investments. Some of the common factors we see across different installations is, try to avoid those closed or proprietary systems. You want to maintain that flexibility. You really want to involve IT early, get them as part of the conversation. Implement strong documentation and ownership. That's going to save a lot of headaches later on. When you do start talking to vendors, ask about integration options early and include that details around future connectivity in any RFP language that you're using. So these are some good tips around that. And lastly, technical solutions alone aren't enough because you want that EMIS to align with your organization's financial digital strategies. So other things to do around building support for that entry project is making sure you identify key decision makers, champions, making sure that you're using simple visuals to communicate progress, both progress of your EMIS system, like, hey, here's where we are, here's our entry point, here's how we want to grow the maturity of our EMIS over time and the benefits that will provide, but also in terms of communicating the savings and the benefits that are coming out of the EMIS that you do have installed. Remember that you do want to tailor that message. Finance cares about return on investments, operations about uptime, executives care about more of the strategic priorities. So making sure that you're talking to them in their language. And lastly, and this one's really important, is making sure that you celebrate the successes of that pilot to build buy-in. So if you have that small scale, you have your entry point project, it gets installed, make sure everyone knows about how great that is working and the benefits and the savings that are coming out of that, because you want that visibility to build the support, to build the momentum for further investments. So that's kind of the roadmap. Every organization's journey is going to look different. The most successful ones share that common pattern. They start small, align with the vision, and then scale smartly. So what I would love to hear is coming out of this workshop from the things we learned today, hopefully you have a sense of what that entry point might be. And I'd really love if you could share, just type in the chat, or if you'd like to come off mute and share it, what's an action that you're going to be taking in the next, this is 30 days, but there's winter holidays. We can extend it a little bit. The next, month or two, what's that next step that you're going to take to move that EMIS forward, to get that entry point in place, to start moving down that journey? So I'd love to pause just for a minute here, and if you could share in the chat or come off mute to share what your next step is going to be, or if you're not sure what that next step is and want to ask for advice on that, please do that as well. This could be, starting making that business case for the entry point EMIS. It could be just like, okay, who do I need to talk to start getting planning for that entry point moving forward? Human, I see that apply for EMIS rebate program, start looking for contractor, modify the PI system. Okay, so you've got that entry point in place and looking into the incentives from Save on Energy. Excellent. So hopefully everyone has that entry point in mind and is thinking about what your next step is. In terms of additional support for this, there is virtual one-on-one coaching available. So if there's anything that we talked about in today's workshop that you'd like some, if you have questions or some additional support for, you can fill out a support intake form. The links for this and the other things described here are in the chat. If you haven't signed up for the monthly bulletin, it gives updates on training and resources available from Save on Energy. There's the training calendar that lists all the upcoming workshops and events. And the training support website has recordings of past workshops, as well as a lot of other excellent resources available on the topic of EMIS and others. As I mentioned before, Save on Energy does have incentives available for EMIS implementation. So these are really great. They can fund the installation of eligible industrial EMIS systems up to $50,000 per facility for smaller facilities under 400,000 gigajoules annually of all fuels, and up to $250,000 for facilities greater than 400,000 gigajoules of baseline consumption. This is really excellent, and we have seen some people apply for these incentives for the entry point project, and then planning to use the incentives again for when they scale that up to a larger EMIS system as well. So there's opportunities to do that. I highly recommend reaching out to Save on Energy for more information to start talking about that, as Human mentioned he's going to be doing. And it could be really great. So you can apply multiple times as long as you stay under that overall cap of up to 250,000 per facility. And again, it'll cover 50% of project costs, and we know a lot of the benefits that can come out of this in terms of the EMIS helping to reduce energy costs, improving performance, helping to ensure accountability for energy use within facilities. The other thing I will mention to help keep the conversation going is if you are working in a facility in a context of energy management, it's free for you to join the energy management community, and this gets you access to online training, online discussion forum, where if you have questions following up from today, you can post them there to a network of peers and energy coaches from Save on Energy. It also gets access to peer discussion groups and small group coaching that can be really useful as well. So if there was anything from today that you want some follow-up discussions on, I highly recommend registering for the community. The link is in the chat there as well. And one last message, some of you may be familiar that Save on Energy does have a podcast, the Energy Manager's Playbook. Season 1 is up wherever you listen to podcasts. 9 episodes featuring Ontario energy managers talking about challenges they faced, how they overcame them. Highly recommend checking it out. Please let us know what you think. And also on this note, we are in the process of working on season 2 of the podcast. So if you have successes in your organizations that you'd like to share with the community, please reach out, let me know. Evan dropped the link to the podcast and also my email if you want to reach out about potentially being a guest on the podcast. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. Again, I apologize for the case study guest that we hope to have here was not able to make it, but the trade-off of that is we end a little bit earlier, so you get a little bit of time back in your day. So hopefully this was useful and you have a bit more focus in terms of finding that entry point for the EMIS. Thank you all for joining us today, and have a great rest of the week.